Hi guys, and welcome back to another video. So before looking into my sketchbook today, I wanted to show you guys something because I'm not too sure how many of you guys remember this little Maseki plush that I made like a while back. So hopefully this video would have came after the sketchbook tour video so that there's less spoilers. But this Maseki plush I made, I don't know when exactly, maybe a year and a half ago or something like that. And it was like kind of the first time I've made a plush of a character like this. So there's like a bunch of learning curves that I had to go through. But hopefully with my hand for scale, you can kind of see that this guy's kind of on the larger side and I can't really bring him anywhere, which kind of brings me back to my sketchbook. So if you watched Saturday's video when I did the sketchbook tour, you probably saw like a quick preview of what I was working on when I got back from an anime convention recently. So I want to make smaller little plushes of my OC Masaki, which is the one on the left, and my OC Kaisen, the one on the right. And I want them to be approximately like 10 centimeter dolls or Nui plushes, similar to what people have made in the past or like what you might have seen floating around online, or similar size to like Niji puppets, if anything. So I did all this brainstorming while I was doing a lot of convention prep because it wouldn't leave my mind at all, but something about like halfway the size of my Maseki plush would be ideal. So off screen or off camera, I actually ended up making my little mini Maseki right here, which is, I don't know, like uber tiny. He's like really small. His head's kind of big and large, but his body is like super tiny, and he's about half the size of the giant Maseki that I've made. So I thought it'd be fun to take you guys along with me as I make Kaisen instead. I did end up adding like a little braided cord or whatever you want to call it to his head as well. So I won't be showing that today, but I'll leave resources to any videos that I refer to in the description if you're interested in learning to make any of these. Here's a small detail. I ended up embroidering a little clover on the right side of his chest, even though it was supposed to be on the left side. I accidentally misplaced where I was supposed to be placing it. But you'll see a little bit more once we do Kaisen so that I can explain exactly how I'm going to do the procedure for all these. But I tried my best to emulate a lot of the little details that I wanted to have done for this particular plush. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at how we are going to make Kaisen. So for how we are going to start, I am going to be doing most of the planning actually digitally on Clip Studio Paint, alongside with using a template that I found online by the user, I think it's Diawoo. So I'll make sure to link that in the description as well if you want to use the similar base. I just found that their plushes were the correct size in terms of like the proportioning and just like the general size of the plush that I wanted. So to kind of keep the similar proportioning to the one that I had of Maseki, I am going to lower the opacity of the one that I did previously and draw over top so that we can do Kaisen's facial features. And then we can go ahead and do his hair, any detailing that I want to do the embroidery for. So the template is going to help me cut the fabric to the correct size. I believe on their Twitter, they do say that you just have to make sure to print this on an A4 sheet of paper. You'll see that part of mine will get cut off because I forgot to shift it downwards. But for the most part, I found this is like kind of the easiest way to get a consistent base and get a doll like kind of like the correct size that I want the doll to look like, if that makes sense. I'll kind of get into more of the reasoning behind why I'm even making these or like what spurred it on. But for now, I guess like as I was doing the hair detailing stuff, one thing I did learn from Maseki's was that I cannot do a lot of detail for the hair method that I ended up doing because I don't like doing a lot of embroidery because I am going to be doing it by hand, which kind of injures my hand a little bit. But I also like the look of a different method because it kind of turns out a little bit cleaner if you're not too familiar with like doing embroidery and stuff, which I'm not too consistent with. So yeah, after that, I've printed out our little sheet with all of our templates, and you can kind of see that the top is cut off like I mentioned, but we'll just draw in the connecting points afterwards. But the next step is to cut out our template. So for me, I am not going to be cutting out everything. I'm going to cut out the face template, one side of the back of the hair, the body, and then the one back side of the body, one of the ears, and the chin part. I did end up cutting some extra pieces for Kaisen's like little hair bits, but I ended up misplacing them, so I won't use them later on when we start adding them to his head. But the reason being that I'm only cutting out certain parts instead of all of them is that I'm just going to flip them over for the other side instead of cutting out separate templates for everything. But if it's easier for you to visualize, I highly recommend that you print and cut all of the pieces out so that you might have a better idea of maybe sizing or just like having the correct amount of parts for your actual template. So the kind of like frosted tracing paper-esque little paper that I'm drawing on top of is actually I believe it's an embroidery stabilizer of some sort. I do have the tearaway version. I know a lot of people have recommended me getting I think it's the water soluble one. So you submerge it into water for it to dissolve and break away, and it kind of gives a cleaner look to your embroidery afterwards. It's basically a good way for me to do the embroidery by having a template without having to draw directly onto our fabric, but also it just makes it a little bit easier to embroider on top of because it's slightly more stiff compared to the fabric that's very like plush and very soft. So I'm putting the fabric, which is our little beige color, alongside with the stabilizer into my very small embroidery hoop, and we can start with doing the embroidery for his face. So you can kind of see for the entire detailing of Masaki's face, it's done entirely with embroidery floss. So let's talk a little bit about that before we actually start with the needlework. So you might see me using embroidery floss that's similar to the long version, or these ones that are kind of on I don't know if they're called like a spool or something. I forget what these ones are called, but I ended up making like a bunch of these cardstock versions so that I can organize my floss and not have to struggle with this, because I find that when I start to unravel them from the longer, like kind of like the original packaging, they tend to get in knots like fairly quick. So I find putting it on these little spool-like things a little bit easier. So for embroidery floss, if you get a certain kind, and I highly recommend this kind, embroidery floss tends to be made up of 6 different threads. I believe some only have 2, but the one that has 6 is easily kind of like able to be split into their individual threads, which allows you to work with much thinner line work or like the actual string so that you don't get such thick detail. So I'm going to be splitting the thread basically to only use one so that I can slip it into an embroidery needle. And then when we're doing the embroidering, it's basically just 2 threads that you're going to be seeing for the most part. Now, I'm not the most confident when it comes to doing anything that has anything to do with sewing or embroidery that much. So I know how to do very basic stitches like the back stitch. I don't know what the other one's called, but then I can do the ladder stitch as well to adhere certain parts to, let's say, like the body to the head and all of that. And then everything else, I'm just doing a basic stitch to kind of fill everything in to be somewhat flat and consistent. Like I mentioned, I'll try my best to list out some of the videos that I used to help me get a better idea how I wanted to make these little plushes, including, I think, the hair tutorial that I used alongside with the template and just like basic embroidery knowledge, I guess, for everything. So other than like actually sewing up the different parts, I think embroidering the face and the detailing to each like little part takes the longest amount of time, and it actually really hurts my fingers sometimes. So I don't know if you'll see it on my ring finger on my right hand. There is like a little scab, and that's because, at least for me, I like to think that I have a high pain tolerance, but as I'm kind of like pushing in and out of the needle, like with the needle, I sometimes use my finger to kind of push the back portion of the needle into our fabric. And because of that, it kind of dug into my finger quite a bit, and I didn't really notice until it bled a little bit. So yeah, if you have to, use a thimble, definitely. If not, just be very careful when doing embroidery or working with the needle in general. But for the most part, everything went pretty smoothly compared to Masaki's. So Masaki's version, I did treat more like a trial run, so I think Kaisen's worked a little bit easier in my opinion. And I think just like his embroidery for his face came out a little bit cuter in my opinion. Maybe it's because it's like a little bit more even, but I don't know. I just like Kaisen's face a little bit more than I did Masaki's, but there's like small things I could probably tweaked along the way instead of like leaving it as is, which I'll talk about in a bit. So because embroidery takes like the biggest bulk of everything for the most part, and I'm going to be embroidering for a little bit more longer in this video, I'm gonna kind of talk about why I even wanted to do this. So I'm not too sure if a lot of you guys are similar to me, where if you're working on a project or something for a very long time, your mind kind of wanders to different ideas and things you want to work on except for the task at hand. So for me, I was working on a lot of chibi drawings and drawing a lot of designs for stickers, and then I was doing a lot of like printing and cutting of the stickers and just assembling things for a convention. But because of that, when I had like any downtime, I guess like I don't really consider it downtime per se. I ended up drawing at my sketchbook about like between 3 to 4 a.m. and I was just sketching out like the little faces of the Nui plushes because I got recommended a video of a person making their own plushes from, I think it's Love in Deep Space maybe. But because of that, I ended up searching more and more videos and like browsing on Pinterest, and so many people have like either their own custom little Nui plushes or like ones that they made like giant batches of. Now, maybe in the future, I will like to talk to my old manufacturer and maybe make some very small little 10 centimeter plushes for you guys in the future. We'll see, because I would love to make one of Masaki and Kaisen so that you guys can take them along with like during travels and stuff. So the kind of reasoning that I wanted them to be so small is because I want them to be portable. I've seen a lot of people take like their little plushes or anything like out and about and they take photos, and I think it's just a cute way to record memories without like having to be in the photo. So maybe in the future I will be able to take Masaki and Kaisen out to have like a little adventure, and I'll take some photos and maybe share it with you guys. But I would have ideally, if I wasn't so terrible with my planning and time management, have had Masaki and Kaisen done before Anime Fawn so I could take them to Edmonton and have them at my booth just to have, I don't know, just more like keepsake photos and stuff. I think it just would have been very cute overall. And I've seen people do that, like if they have their very favorite characters, some people bring it to their convention booths and have it as more like moral support. My friend uses her, I think Samatoki from Hype Mike, and she uses him as like their tip jar thing, and I think it's very cute. So that's kind of the reason why I even wanted to make these in the first place. It's just my brain wanders and then I go really deep into researching and looking up stuff so that I can see whether or not I can make my own as well. So with the majority of the embroidery being done for the kind of like skin base, I guess, with this kind of like little cream color that I'm using for the skin, you can see that I have the face done. I've embroidered a kind of like silver clover onto Kaisen's body as well, hopefully on the correct side. But after that, I decided that I would just sew the body together first, similar to how I did Masaki's, because it's kind of like one of the parts that I find the easiest to sew. It's just basically like a little four-cornered little cushion, if you could say. So it's just like a hole at the very top and then his two arms and his two legs, and I just find it very easy to complete. The head takes the longest for me since we have to do the chin to the face, then we're gonna have to do the ears, we have to do the hair, then you have to do the two backside of the hair and then like kind of like loop everything together. And I do the hair in a very convoluted way, so yeah, I'll talk about it once we get there. But for now, I'm using the back of a paintbrush to kind of push out the limbs a little bit so that they don't look so round and kind of funny being like sucked into the body. So I'm pushing it out because as we're sewing stuff, I will always sew with the good sides facing inwards, and the exposed, I'm going to consider it like the bad side, would be facing outwards, so that by the time we flip our little sewed together body, all of the raw edges and like every mistake and stuff is kind of like pushed into the inside. And then after that, I went ahead and started to stuff the body with, I think it's like polyfill, so just polyester filling for plushes that I have plenty of from making my Masaki plush. I think I've made a Ditto and I've made a Pomudachi in the past. So yeah, this is kind of, I guess, like Kaisen and Masaki are like my 4th and 5th project. Oh no, I made a Jumpty Dumpty as well. So I guess they're like my 5th and 6th project that I've done as like in terms of a sewing project. I'm very much a novice when it comes to doing anything regarding sewing. I just know how to conjoin 2 pieces of cloth together, and I guess that's enough for me to make a plush. But working on the hair. So once I've finished with the embroidery of the face, I am cutting out the face from the hair so that we can still use it as a template. I'm also transferring it onto another sheet of the stabilizer for embroidery. Then we can prepare our black cloth for Kaisen's hair onto my embroidery hoop. So after that, I will also place on our stabilizer, screw that in, and we can start embroidering our little stars in his hair. So I did kind of do Kaisen's body correctly with having the clover on the left side of his body. But when I was doing the stars and kind of putting the template back on top of the hair, I accidentally flipped it. So the right side is now where the left side should be, and the left side is where the right side should be. So the little sparkles in his hair kind of just flipped over, which I didn't notice until I started sewing everything together. So I think most people would have seen these kinds of plushes, like either they're 10 centimeter dolls, 15 or 20, with more or less embroidery adhering the hair to the face. So if you ever seen kind of like a thick outline of where the hair meets the skin on your doll, oftentimes those are embroidered onto the skin fabric directly. But I've seen a method that is a little bit less labor intensive if you are like me and don't really enjoy embroidering that much, just because, like I said, it kind of takes a toll on my hand, and I don't think I will do the cleanest application. Maybe after I've done Kaisen's face, I do feel a little bit more comfortable with doing embroidery to be more consistently like of a certain thickness, but for the most part, I don't feel super confident with it. So what I'm gonna do is I duplicated the fabric for his bangs about halfway up his scalp, and then we sewed it similar to the body. So have the good fabric facing inwards, flipping it inside out, and it becomes more of a 3D feeling kind of hairpiece instead of adhering the hair directly onto the face. So I found this a little bit easier, but it does mean that I lose a lot of detail because it is hard to have sharp corners or thinner pieces when doing this method. So I am going to kind of lose some of Kaisen's little wispy bits that come towards his face, but I think it's okay compared to like how I look at Masaki's hair and his hair. I think they look different enough that they kind of come across correct in a way. I definitely wish I kind of moved it a little bit lower. But after that, I sewed that kind of front part of the hair to the skin portion because those need to be one piece. And then I'm working on the back of the hair to have the correct shape and like also sewing the 2 back pieces together. And then after that, I sewed the chin to the bottom of our chibi face. Now, I sewed the chin a little bit too early. I probably should have sewed on the ears first and then sewed the chin. So I don't think I showed it in the video, but I ended up snipping away at the chin area to make room for the ears and then re-sewing the chin back on top of the head and the ears together so that it makes more sense and I don't have a weird gap in between. After that, we're taking our hairpiece again, which you can kind of see as like a half dome, and we're going to put that together with our kind of front part of his head. So once again, the good sides are facing inwards, kind of like against each other, and I'm pinning down the hair to make sure that things are more or less aligned so that we can sew everything to be similar to like a ball shape where the gap or the opening for us to fill in the face is going to be at the very bottom near the back side of his chin. I think like the more I talk about doing certain parts of the procedure, it's going to be very confusing. So if you personally are looking to make your own kind of handmade plush like this, do check out the channels that I'm going to be putting into the description because I find them very helpful. If not, there's like a whole bunch of different resources that you could probably find. And don't be like me and accidentally sew your little cord to the back of his head, because now I don't know if this is actually going to come apart eventually because I don't know what the string was from initially. So yeah, but for the most part, I think his entire head has been sewed properly. So we can go ahead and start to flip him inside out, and we'll see kind of what the finished result will kind of look like before we start to stuff his head with the polyfill. Oh, I don't think I really mentioned it also. So when I was sewing on the head from the front piece of the hair to the back piece of the hair, I did end up sticking the little braided cord in between so that I don't have to shove it in later and like cut a hole and like re-sew it like I did for Masaki. It was just easier for me to do it now. So if you're wondering how I made it, there is a video that you can use like a cardboard loom and embroidery floss to make these little braided cord, I guess, which I find very sturdy for what I wanted because I don't have like the macrame cord that people tend to use, or like thicker kind of string or rope or something to have them have some kind of string on top of their head that I find durable enough. But next step, I ended up wanting to add and make all the little extra pieces for his hair because Kaisen does have a little bit of longer hair, so I need a piece to frame the kind of like left side of his face, and then I have two pieces sticking out as well on the left and the right side of his face, kind of above his ears. The piece that I'm doing right now is kind of similar to Masaki, where he kind of has like an ahoge-esque piece of lock of hair, I guess. It's basically the piece that comes from the center of his head that kind of like curves backwards. I'll put a reference of Kaisen if you haven't seen him before, but I was trying my best to mimic as many parts of his hair that I could so that he looks somewhat recognizable. But after that, I ended up pinning where I think I wanted his bangs and some of the little pieces of his hair to be, and then we can go ahead and start to sew everything down. So the method that I like with the hair for this gives me a lot of wiggle room with trying to place the hair piece to be exactly where I want it for the most part. I definitely wish I pulled down the little center portion of his hair further down his face so that it could be pretty much like between his eyes. But I'm not too sure if I left a big enough gap that it won't look super derpy. So yeah, hopefully he looks cute for the most part. But his hair planning gave me a little bit less trouble than I did for Masaki because I honestly did not know how I wanted to interpret Masaki's hair so that he looks like himself. I definitely think I made his forehead a little bit too large, but I think they're both cute nonetheless. So in terms of the actual plush themselves, I believe this is kind of like the last step. So I am using pretty much what I would consider similar to a ladder stitch between his head and his body. After that, after he's kind of like all sewed together, I filled in the rest and kind of filled in the hole behind him. I am using a piece of duct tape to remove a lot of the dark black lint from his face because for some reason the black fabric sheds so much. So there's like little dots everywhere on my desk from Kaisen's fabric for the most part, from his hair and later on from his clothes. After that, to give them a boost of that cuteness, I decided to pull out my very old blush. It's kind of like a more peach tone, if anything, and I'm taking an old paintbrush that I've been using to kind of fix my fabric when I'm flipping it inside out, and I'm brushing it on top of his face for both of his cheeks. In between the eyes, like where the nose would be, I'm doing a little bit under his chin and around his, I guess, where the hairline meets the skin as well, just to give it a little bit more dimension and just to give him a little bit more color as well. I added it to his ears and the tips of his hands as well, so I just think they look a little bit cuter like this. A little bit more for Masaki as well, because his was kind of not as vibrant as I did compared to Kaisen's. I think both of them look super cute already, but obviously Kaisen's missing a few things, so let's go ahead and make his outfit. Now, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time explaining how I made his clothes because I don't think I sewed these properly at all, nor did I hem Kaisen's clothes or Masaki's clothes because I couldn't be bothered. Maybe in the future I will. But right now, their clothes are pretty much unhemmed, except for, I think, the front portion of Kaisen's, like, overshirt. But to start off, I do have kind of this wine red, almost maroonish eggplant color for his undershirt. And it's supposed to be a V-neck, but like I said, I didn't hem it, so I don't have that nice crisp V for the front portion. It was kind of funny that to dress these guys, because their heads are so large, they do have to put their shirts by putting their legs through the head hole of a shirt in order to put it on, unless you're doing the method of velcroing their shirts or fabrics like behind them. That's another method. But for me, this kind of works out nicely. The fabric was a little bit too tight for him, but it did make it a little bit easier for me to hide some of the raw edges by folding them inwards so that we can expose his hands. And I've already made his shorts, or his pants. I guess in this case, it's his pants. So I did not make them a little bit like high enough on his waist and like tummy area, so they feel like they're gonna keep sliding. So I might have to remake his shorts or pants later on. But last but not least, I did want to make his kind of like outer modern kimono kind of top. And because the fabric would have been more exposed on the edges, I did end up hemming a little bit of the front portions and like near the collar. I just didn't do the sleeves, nor did I do the very bottom of his like little top for the most part. But other than that, I think Kaisen is done. And this is kind of the aftermath of everything with a very messy desk. But with Masaki done, and he has like a little sweater, his little blue pants, we have Kaisen also done to be kind of accompaniment or company for Masaki. And I think both of them actually turned out pretty dang cute, if I do say so myself. I definitely think I do still struggle a lot with the sewing portion, but I'm still pleased with exactly like how their faces turned out, if that makes sense. Just in general, I think both of them look super cute, and I love how tiny they are, so I'll definitely try to take them on trips. But like I mentioned, this is kind of like the braided portion of their little strings that I'll leave in the description if you're interested in making your own. I think these are cute as bracelets too, so yeah, you can kind of see my shoddy kind of sewing for Masaki as well. I think I did a better job on Kaisen's in terms of like exposed stitches, but I think both of them actually turned out pretty cute in my opinion. So I don't know if I'll make my other OCs in the future. This is definitely more like a labor of love. Like it takes a long time to make these, but it's okay. I think they turned out super cute. So I feel like for me, they were kind of worth it to make. But hopefully you guys enjoyed watching me make little Kaisen into a plush, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye!